Hey everybody, welcome to Tech Talk Tuesday. This is a little bit different. We just made our first real serious mistake. During our actual live webinar, we forgot to record it. So I'm here to reenact or condense some of the material in a little bit shorter format. So today we're talking about tools of the trade. And the concept here that we covered on the webinar was these are tools that there are some tools that are 100% required to do your job, and then there's other tools that make your job easier. So, with traditional irrigation and conventional wire irrigation, the pinnacle of tools is a multimeter and a pressure gauge. Those are great tools, but when we get into two-way digital communication, networking, we're going to need some more sophisticated tools. So we're going to move into that today. So I'm going to start off with splicing tools. These are specifically for two-wire, but they apply to conventional wires. So I'm starting off I'm going to talk about a cable cutter. So a cable cutter, right? What's really different about a cable cutter is it's got that curved blade and it bites into that two-wire cable much better. And these are a significant difference from our traditional flat blade cutters, right? And these really grab into this one. So these are a great investment as you get into cable. If you're working with number 14 or other wires like that, these will be fine. But the cable cutter is a really wonderful thing. The other thing that really changed my world when it came to wire splicing on two-wire was what we affectionately call a potato peeler. So this potato peeler is made by King Industries, and it does have that potato peeler component in there, much like a vegetable peeler you might have on home. What we do is pull off a strip of wire off of both sides, and we have these little vegetable peelings that come off of that one. So the idea on this is that we can strip back the wire without nicking the wire inside. All right, so now we've got a clean inner jacket that's not nicked. And what's very common is people will look at this cable and say, oh, I know that. That's Romex. I've worked with that at home. So they bust out a utility knife or a pocket knife, and they're going to score this like they might score Romex. Well, Romex stays inside in a waterproof house in a junction box. This is going outside in the water or in a very wet environment. Because let's just pause for a moment. We're talking about all of this for a good two-wire splice. And these are DBRY6s, and we're concerned about those. So anything that gets us a good splice is going to be really important. Now, Andy had talked about getting calls from folks that have some overcurrents or splice issues or what definitely sound like wire issues. And one of the questions will say, did it rain? Are the valve boxes full of water? Oh, yeah. Well, what can happen is if you use that utility knife and you nick down to the wire back at this initial portion of it, what can happen is if that valve box is full of water, now that where that nick is, and we can see in my glass of water, that nick is now submerged underwater, creating a overcurrent, or at least a splice issue. So those are things you want to avoid. So that brings us through our splicing tools. Let's jump into what I'm going to call electrical tools. And electrical tools, the number one thing that I think is the number one important thing is a milliamp clamp. So a milliamp clamp is an amp clamp that can read down to is a milliamp clamp that can read down to 1/1000th of an amp. This is a Armada Pro 95, but BK Precision makes one too, and there's a couple others on the market. What's nice about this is I can use it to measure amperages along my two-wire path if I have an overcurrent issue. But with the additional wire leads that come with this one, I now can use this as a volt-ohm-meter. I can measure voltage output from my outlet, from my power supply, off the board. I can test fuses and all the like of that. Now, our very, very first episode that we did on Tech Talk Tuesday was on two-wire overcurrent troubleshooting. So if you want to know more about this, please reference it. That's really good. The other tool that goes alongside of this, and it is a tool, most of you have this on your truck, is a known good solenoid. Combine these two together, right? Now I'm going to use this to build up a load on the two-wire path to trick my controller into using the transformer that's in there, and I'm going to use this device to measure. Super efficient way to track down an overcurrent out in the field. It's worth every nickel that you might pay for them. If you don't have one and you're working with two-wire, get one now before you need it. Another tool that kind of fits into this is going to be a toner. And people that are watching this that have been around for a while recognize this as something straight out of 1980. This device actually, this particular one is actually that old. It's over 30 years old, but it still works. The technology has not changed much on this. These came from the telecom industry. So they needed to track down out of 100 pairs of telephone wires, track down one pair out of that one. Well, you can touch the wire and now you can get a tone that comes down the wire and specifically identify it. Real value comes in if you're working with conventional, but if you are putting a soil moisture sensor on an existing system, a conventional wire system, you need to get your soil moisture sensor on specific terminals, A1, A2, or B1, B2 terminals. If it's on zone 8, it's not going to look for the information on that one. You can use this to track that down. So this is a really good tool for that one. It's very, very affordable, something that's easy to get into the market in with. The other device that kind of fits into that one is a 521 tracker. I don't have one with me. 521 tracker is when does very similar to what the toner is going to do, but when you can't touch the wire. So essentially when it's buried, you can follow the wire path as you move down where you think your main line is, because let's face it, we don't always have we don't always have an as-built plan. The other thing that fits in that one is a pulsar or an A-frame. And you're going to use that to locate a wire break. So where a wire actually has a ground fault and bleeding into the ground, you're going to send a large pulse of energy down that path and then track that down, and you can pinpoint that. In my early years, I was blown away when the wire tracker guy was able to locate not only the location of where the break was, but also give me a depth and say, your break is approximately 15 inches below the surface of the grate. Very impressed. Next one up is going to be hydraulic tools. Hydraulic tools are about pressure gauges. So when I worked distribution, what was really common when people come in and say, hey, my rotating nozzles aren't covering the way they should, there's a problem. Like, yes, there is a problem. What kind of pressure do you have is my question. Oh, I have good pressure. No. So, of course, then you sell them a pressure tee and a pressure gauge and go put this out on the spray head or the rotating nozzle and tell me what the pressure is at the beginning of the system and at the end of the lateral, right? So this is what we're going to use to measure pressure out on the sprinkler head. Now, if you have a different flavor of sprinkler head, you're going to need a different adapter. So this will fit a different style of them. So this is just that same type. It's just reversed, so that works. On larger systems, they aren't going to be spray heads. They're probably going to use rotor heads. And rotor heads, what you're going to want to do is measure the pressure directly at the nozzle coming out of the rotor. We're going to need a pitot tube to do that. A pitot tube is just a thin brass tube that you would dip into the stream of the nozzle and catch the water as it comes by. It doesn't actually block all the water coming out. Connect to a pressure gauge, it's wonderful. Well, I've added this red hose, and this red hose allows me to get out of that spray of water, because when you do this in the winter, you're getting water all over the place. It's not very comfortable. Well, in the southern climates where I am, where we irrigate during the winter. Now, this hose I got from Harbor Freight, maybe $4. It's just an air compressor hose, really short, that would go onto your air compressor tool. It does the same thing. So for a few bucks, it's a great deal, great way to improve your pressure gauge. Another pitot tube style is made by a manufacturer that sells plastic heads. And this is a tube that would sit directly on top of the head, much like it might sit on top of my microphone here. And this would go into the nozzle and it would measure that as well. So this works pretty well too. So different styles. Now, all of these types of pressure gauges work, but another option is to use the pressure transducer kit. This does the same thing. Now, to measure the pressure out at my sprinkler head at 2 o'clock in the morning, I need to be there at 2 o'clock in the morning, because if I measure at 10 o'clock in the morning, it's very likely different water pressure, different dynamic water pressure. With the baseline pressure transducer kit, I can drop this into the main line or pretty much anywhere I want to measure the pressure, connected in the 2-wire path, and I can get a pressure reading. I can look at it in a report. I don't have to be there real time. I can also use it to run my system and manage my system real time. Okay, next up is communication tools. So getting data outside the controller, bringing it out into the real world, bringing it into your office, sharing it with other devices, sharing it with other controllers is really critical, and it makes baseline controllers work really well. So that's about networking and communication. So one of the primary communication tools you need is an Ethernet cable. So every single baseline controller has an RJ45 port built into the back. This is how we bring communication into just about all of them. Cell modems connect in this way. Lots of different devices connect in this way. So this is an essential tool. This is also important if you're going to do any programming with a laptop or a phone. Now, I mentioned, so a laptop, you may need an Ethernet adapter on your laptop if you're going to be doing essentially radio programming is mainly what I'm talking about right now. If you're doing that programming and your computer is new enough that does not have an Ethernet port, well, we're going to need some way to adapt that in. So here's an Ethernet port, and this goes to USB. So I can connect USB to Ethernet. That's one way to do it. But a really wonderful way to do it is do it with your phone. So here we've got Ethernet to Lightning. So this allows me to use my phone, in this case my iOS phone, to do some basic programming for my Ethernet radio or for a 3200 Wi-Fi module. So this is kind of cool. It's a very, we always have our phone with you. There's also an adapter that's available for Androids or Google phones. So look for those as well. Those are online and available. So those are the networking tools that are available that are important. Baseline focused software tools. There's a couple things I'm going to mention. The first one is Base Manager, right? It's already there. So please utilize it. It's kind of disappointing to log into someone's Base Manager account to see that they haven't set up the map, or they haven't named zones, they haven't named programs, they haven't set a custom pin. Those are all things that are really good ideas to do. So if you aren't sure how to fully take advantage of Base Manager in your Base Manager account, reach out to an RSM or Baseline support. We'll be glad to help you understand how to use that. So that said, if you're a distributor and you're doing a radio site survey, two tools that are essentially critical for that one is Ping, which is a app that would run on a phone to check signal strength, data loss, signal packets, and things like that. It would give you some information on your data, how it's moving around over your radio network. And then More app is another app that's used to record that data and submit that information to Baseline. To get that information, since only a few people probably need that one, if you're a distributor and need that, reach out to Baseline. We'd be more than glad to link you and sign you up for that information. That's it for my actual nuts and bolts hardware. There's a couple other pieces of software that we mentioned in the webinar, and I'd say one of them is there's a Google Doc. So cool thing about a Google Doc is that, it's a living document. You can go in there. Well, right now we have a Google Doc that you can jump in and you can put your tools that you want to use, that you like to use, and you can see what other people's suggestions have been. It's a living document. The link's in the video description. So with that, you can actually put a custom marker on your map. So there you can do a zone markers on your maps, but you can also do a custom marker. And in a custom marker, you can have a URL. So you could have a custom marker with the URL that takes you to the Google Doc with all the site documents. So that's our short abbreviated version of our reenactment of Tech Talk Tuesday. Thanks for coming. We'll see you all next week. Take care now. Bye-bye.